How's everybody doing? Yes? You had a good Games for Change? Yes, great. So I'm Clara, Fernandez-Vara. I'm Associate Arts Professor at NYU, and I wear many hats. I'm a game scholar. My work comes from the humanities. I'm also a game designer, and I make games, at times of research, at times commercially. And today I'm going to talk about a game that I know pretty well, and I played back in the day when it was released, which is Brain Age. So yeah, that's Brain Age. Anybody here played Brain Age? A few of you, yay. Yeah, this was released in 2006. It was released for the Nintendo DS. And as I said, I played it back in the day, for probably several months. But as a kind of blast of the past, let me show you this basically infomercial about what Brain Age did.
Hi, I'm John Dorman on the set of Discoveries This Week at the Science Channel. Did you know that just as you exercise your body to stay fit, there's a way to exercise your mind to stay sharp? Studies show that cognitive exercises can stimulate your mind through increased blood flow to the brain. A prominent video game company has come up with a way to make exercising your brain easy. It's called Brain Age. Train your brain in minutes a day, and you play it on the Nintendo DS. The idea is that by performing a few daily mental exercises, you can help sharpen your mind. Brain Aids test your cognitive skills through 14 activities such as memory, math, and verbal challenges. It even includes Sudoku puzzles. Think of these activities as a treadmill for the mind, helping you flex your mental muscles and stay sharp. To learn more about Brain Age, visit brainage.com. Brain Age is rated E for everyone.
All right. As you saw, it was released for the Nintendo DS in 2005 in Japan. It was one of the early titles, and then 2006 in Europe and the US. In Korea, it was, I think, 2007. It was part of the so-called Touch Generations label, which will become important later on. And it was kind of like an adaptation of Ryuta Kawashima, his book, Train Your Brain, 60 Days to a Better Brain. So it was a series of exercises that were made into a video game. For those of you, I don't know if we have any cognitive scientists in the room, when you are testing anything that has to do with improving your brain, like what people do already are these little mini games. So it's a collection of mini games that people could play in very short bouts. So the idea is that you could play in short sessions. It was kind of the antithesis of what we understand as a game that is addictive, that you can play over and over again. The idea is that you didn't have to play for a long time. You could devote just a few minutes a day, but the idea is that you had to keep it constant. It was not very different from how Wii Fit, for example, worked. That was the idea that you could play these games in short bouts. But it was encouraging being constant and keep playing. That's how you got the benefits of the game. Also, another interesting thing is that the console was held sideways. It was like a book. In a way, when you hold the console like this, it looks like a book. It doesn't look like a console anymore. And the controls, as you saw, were not the buttons. The buttons can be very intimidating to certain players. I don't know if you've ever counted how many buttons a console controller can have, but most of them have more fingers than we have. So here the controls were speaking to the console. It was drawing on the screen. It didn't require us to actually learn where the buttons were. And this was also a collection of games, as we're going to see in a second. So this is what the game looks like. So here you have to memorize what the numbers were. Here you have to count how many people come in and out of the house. This is counting the number of syllables in a sentence. And this is making calculations really, really fast. So it's a way of exercising your calculating energy. And then there was a great implementation of Sudoku. The interface of that was really, really well designed for a touch screen. So there were different modes for the game. The main thing, the title of the game, Brain Age, refers to the kind of cognitive capabilities that we have not as our physical age, but in how fast or how well we can recall information or calculate. So the game would have this little check at the beginning where you had to do a few tests and see, how well you did. Then after that, you had the brain training, the little exercises that would help you improve this cognitive abilities. And then, as you saw here, they have a Sudoku mode as well, where you could just play Sudoku puzzles on your DS. What is interesting here is that the brain age, most people you always really flunked. You always did really bad, which is kind of normal. Whenever you play a new game, if you haven't played anything like it before, you usually don't do that great because you're learning the conventions of a game. So brain age kind of made you feel that you were getting better, but that's also by design. As a game designer, switching my hat for a second, as a game designer, what I do is teaching my players how to play a game, and they're always going to feel, if the game is well designed, they're always going to feel that they're doing better. So it's a kind of like dirty trick that the game uses in order to get them, players, the feeling that they are doing better. Mind you that Nintendo never directly claimed that brain age had an effect on your memory or your cognitive abilities. There are, the text of the game itself are telling you that, these exercises can improve this, they might be good for you, but it's not making any health claims. Nintendo also talks to their lawyers when they write their games. So what happened with brain age is that it was a kind of unexpected success for what was then a games for health before we started to talk about games for health in a generalized way. Again, this is 2006. This is well before games for change. This was a game that was, at the beginning, supposedly going to sell just 100,000, tens of thousands of copies. That's as much as they expected. But they ended up selling millions. These are the current numbers of total sales just of the first game. It was so successful that it had 2 different sequels. In Europe, these games have also been repackaged and released in different ways. The influence is not only on the sequels, but it kind of opened the way to other kinds of games like Big Brain Academy, or the Professors by Majesco, or Gameloft also released their own games of Brain Challenge. And I don't know if there's anybody from Lumosity in the room, but Lumosity is an app, kind of takes it's an inheritor of the things that Brain Age opened up and brought into the mainstream, which is the main point that I'm trying to make. So this is the game, and what I'm going to talk about is what is the impact of brain age. As I said, this was released in 2006. This well-played session is a retrospective, so we are in a privileged position now to see what is it that brain age actually did. Rather than measuring the short-term impact of the game, how can we measure the longer-term impact? And in order to do that, I'm going to tell you the story of my mom. That's not a photo of my mom, but this is a real story. This is really my mom. So my mom is from Spain, like I'm from Spain. And it so happened that my sister bought herself a Nintendo DS, a pink one, just like that. My mom saw the console, and she never really cared about video games. She had seen me, she had seen my brother play video games. My sister is probably the ones of us who didn't play as much as we did. And my mom saw it, and she saw brain age, and she thought, oh, maybe I could use this. I'm getting old, and I like, I realized that my memory is kind of going. So she started with brain training. It was kind of like her way to start using the Nintendo DS. And basically, she appropriated the console. My sister really didn't see her console again, which the console became El Nintendogs. That's how my mom calls it, still to this day. And the part that she played the most was the Sudoku. Again, the interface of the Sudoku was very accessible. She likes puzzles. She likes crosswords. It's something that I like too. Is one thing that we have in common. Like my mom has a love for words and puzzles, and we play kind of like the same things. And then my brother, who was also around and realized that my mom was really, really stuck to her console. My mom was just telling me this morning that people started to look at her weird because she carried her console everywhere. Then my brother realized that that was going on, so he started feeding my mom other games. Some of them were things like Puzzle Quest, which is a kind of bejeweled RPG, was also like really, really compelling. Games like Hotel Dusk, which also belongs to the Touch Generations label. It's an adventure game, which also had you hold the Nintendo DS sideways. And then Ace Attorney Phoenix Wright is one of my favorite games of all time, which is a visual novel adventure game. So it went from, puzzle games, and these adventure games are also kind of puzzle-based, but more narrative. But then this kind of kept escalating. And my mom got really, really, really into Mario Kart DS. She 100%ed Mario Kart in the DS. Then she went on to Pokemon. She's played more Pokemon than I have, all in the DS. And for me, the most surprising part is that she played Okami-den. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Okami or Okami-den, but this is a 3D game where you're navigating a 3D space and jumping around, which for most people, it is a kind of jump to go from 2D to 3D. When I went from 2D games, which is what I grew up with, to 3D, it took me a while to get used to the new controls and the new way of thinking. So my mom just went to play Okami-den, and she became, if not a gamer, she is completely literate in video games. You can throw a game at her, and she'll know how to figure it out. She's not a fan of things like Final Fantasy. That's got like silly numbers. That's not that interesting. It's also too emo, but that's my opinion. But for her, Brain Age became a gateway game. This was the game that made the technology of video games invisible. By being accessible, at first using the touchscreen, your voice, then getting used to the console itself, the buttons were not as scary anymore. So my mom and players like her became these gamers, like they can play games as well. And this is important, that the technology is not scary, is something that is very fundamental to all of you who are working in games with change, because a lot of the pushback that you might get in certain instances might be because the technology might look scarier. Now we have cell phones, tablets, we have touchscreens, that they are much more common, so it's a lot easier to get into games. But one of the achievements of the Nintendo DS, and specifically of Brain Age, was becoming that kind of way, that tunnel into being a player of video games without feeling that kind of stigma. Since we're talking about the impact of Brain Age, let's talk about the kind of short-term impact of Brain Age. And we'll go back to my mom in a second. But I was looking at different studies that measured, does Brain Age actually help you, your cognitive abilities, your memory, your motor abilities as well. And there's actually quite a bit, and most of these papers are relatively recent, 2010, 2012, 2014, 2013. And they've all measured, both in children and the elderly, how playing the game helps you, with calculations, with recall. And again, this is also part of what game design is doing. We always get better at the games that we play a lot. There are also other studies that are very skeptical. There is this research group in France that is particularly skeptical of things like Brain Age and brain training games, because they have actually tested the game beside, pen and paper games of a similar kind, but also with platformers like Super Mario Bros. And they realized that Brain Age is actually not that great for memory, that other games are actually better for encouraging your memory, and that the improvements of players from one game to the next is just because they're playing video games. It's not the game itself that is going to change it. And this is kind of, some of you, if you're already in this field, you probably do this to evaluate your games, right? You make a game, you have your pretest, you have your 3 groups, you have a control group, you have the one that is using the game that you want, you have another that uses a different method, and you compare the 3, right? And this is what these studies have done with all these commercial games. And this is, again, measuring the short-term impact of this game. But there's also the kind of longer-term impact or the more widespread impact. And I want to talk very, very briefly about media effects. This is very general. I'm not going into specific theories or specific authors or things like cultivation theory, for example. I'm just talking about the concept of media effects. Because as somebody who comes from the humanities, at times I find the concept of media effects of like you're watching something is going to change you, you're playing a game and is going to change you, it needs a lot of qualification. It has to be handled with care. First of all, this concept that we consume media, it feels very one way. It feels that we consume something, we use it, and it's like we toss it aside. And it's also, in a way, very capitalistic. It's like we're consuming it. It's not about engaging with it. It's not about tackling it critically. So I have a problem with this idea of consuming media. And also, I don't think that media texts can change, their audience on their own. I don't think the brain age changed my mom just on itself. It became a stepping stone, but not necessarily, changed, the way that she was playing. She was playing one game and then another and then another. She could just have played Sudoku forever. So we are playing games in context of other games, of other media. And, certain types of media effects theory kind of look at the text that we're consuming in a kind of monolithic way. Is one way. We are passive. I hate the concept of passive media. That's not a thing. We're always engaging with the things that we're reading. If movies are passive, if you watch a movie in a language that you don't know, depending on the kind of movie, it can be very challenging to follow if you don't understand the language. So again, the media effects is something to take with a grain of salt. Things like cultivation theory look at the ecology of television, for example, and how that affects the ideology of the spectatorship. But I think that I'm trying to push back against the idea that we play a game, we are going to be changed by it alone. We are here in games for change. It's about mini games. It's about the media escape. The media effects narrative is also what favored this concept that video games are bad for you, video games are violent, and there's still a kind of bad rap that video games have. This happens to me still to this day when I tell people outside of these circles that I work in games, I'm a game designer. I get a lot of people who say like, oh no, I don't play games, even though I might have seen them 5 minutes before playing Candy Crush. But this idea that games are something that can affect your behavior, or can change your behavior, something that is harping in this myth of media effects. And just when we thought that, things like brain age or lumosity were helping rehabilitate, the general image or the mainstream image of video games, now we just have a new type of disorder associated with games and addiction. So not back to square one, but there's another battle that we have to fight. So we're still on the media effects myth, but one of the things that Brain Age managed is to flip around the discourse. The idea that games have an effect on you, still, media effects discourse, but it showed, well, if they can they can influence you to be violent or to be antisocial, maybe we can make games that can change you for good, that can change you for better, that can improve you. And things like, how they're more accessible, how it's becoming more acceptable because more people are doing it, are changing that discourse. Again, even though now is in our favor, in the favor of the community of Games for Change, we do, I want to kind of be skeptical of this idea of media effects, because just by playing one game, just by engaging with one game, we're not going to change things. It has to be a whole ecology of games. We have to play them together. And that's when Nintendo came about. Back in 2006, they created this label, Touch Generations, because they understood, first of all, the situation of power that Nintendo had. They had the ears and eyes and hands of many players. And they realized, well, if we have gamers that are very devoted, why don't we go out and try to extend our audience? Why don't we try to get more players and make more money? So they released games in this label that were like Nintendogs. So, have your very cute pet. I don't know if you've ever played it, but I love Nintendogs. I love my little Shiba Inu. Elite Beat Agents, which is a music game. That one is face training, the one in Japanese. So you will have face exercises to make your skin tighter and look prettier. They had hidden object games, like Mr. Case Files. They had cooking games or cooking guides. They were using the software in new ways. There were language learning games as well. So there was a kind of variety of using the same hardware to appeal to many different tastes, to find your own game with the Nintendo DS. So that was the idea. I mean, Nintendo really wanted to make money. And they realized, hey, if we appeal to people who might not be gamers, maybe we can get to sell more games. And in a way, they were very successful at that. They were very successful with Wii U, but because they were in that unique situation to be able to talk to a lot of people, to be able to reach out to a larger audience. And my mom was part of that audience, was kind of like the perfect person to market the Nintendo DS and specifically Brain Age to. The women over 35 is a really large sector of players. Now, it was back then, but now it's even bigger. And this is just a recent data from the ESA report from this year, where there are more adult women playing video games than boys under 18, which is supposed to be the audience, the model of what a gamer is. And for her, now things like smartphones, tablets, this has helped reaching out people like my mom, or people people who don't think of themselves as gamers, like your grumpy uncle, doesn't have to be a woman anymore. 48% of mobile players are women. It is a very sizable part of the market, and part of it is because there's been games and there's been ads and there's been a concerted effort to reach to this audience that didn't play games or didn't think of themselves as people who would play video games, which is more important. Because really, I want to kind of push back against the concept that, if you make a game for your mom, you're making it very accessible. It's like, your aunt doesn't like playing games, so try it with them and see she'll play it. My mom, your aunt, your grumpy uncle, they all want to play games. It's just they have not found the games that they want to play. Part of it is because the negative stereotype that to this day is still associated. Also because the technology can be intimidating, although as I said, mobile platforms are helping easing players into new games. And the things like we need games about new topics. Brain Age was a game about helping your brain, exercising your brain, and playing Sudoku. Even as silly as that, and it's played in short bouts, it can be attractive to a certain part of the population, a certain part of the players that previous games had not reached out to. So going back, with the advantage of having 12 years since this game was released in the US and Europe, now we can look back and realize the Brain Age really opened this concept of games being good for you or being an acceptable activity to play in public, because of the advertising that they used, but also because it was a platform that became very popular. It changed the mainstream, and Nintendo was in the position to have a very loud voice in the mainstream. It was also designed, when I first saw the Nintendo DS, I was just like, what's this thing with 2 screens? What does this mean? That's kind of stupid. And then I just loved my Nintendo DS. So did my mom. She was, El Nintendo's. It was all hers. But, it made technology accessible. It was understandable. It was not, this kind of arcane or weird device that you had to press a lot of buttons, to make things happen. It kind of de-emphasized the need for motor skills and emphasized the need for better mental skills, which is what some players actually wanted to do. And this is important in the realm of games to change, in the realm of neurogaming, for example, because at times we don't take into account the context in which we're playing. If your players don't know how to use the technology, if they're not familiar with the genre that you are making your game into, that's going to interfere in your results. If you have, and this, I've seen this in my own research and my own work, if I'm making an adventure game in order to teach, theater, classical theater, for example, and your players are not familiar with the conventions of adventure games, then they're going to be disengaged. It's not the genre that appeals to them. Same if you want to measure reflex, how fast somebody can react against something, and you make a first-person shooter. If you are not a first-person shooter player, you are going to get tainted results. So having that context, what are the kinds of technologies that they are familiar with, but also what are they comfortable playing with? They might know the genre, they might have the skills, but they might feel uncomfortable playing certain types of games. So in a way, like when you are trying to measure the impact of your game, don't just look at the game itself and not looking at what other games are out there, what games have been there before, what games is your audience going to play as well. So in conclusion, I think the Brain Age was a milestone. It's not that it had a single impact, but it kind of opened the way for this idea that games could be good for you. And being from the humanities, I'm going to be a bit selfish here and say that the social science methods are very useful to measure the short-term impact of a game. Maybe you can check the impact over the years as well. But I think that in the humanities, we can actually see what is the impact, the cultural impact of a game. It's not about numbers alone, but what are the games that have changed history? What are the games that have opened the ways for other games to exist? So it's important to look at the games that we play in context. And, like what we do in the humanities is basically telling you if your game actually had relevance, over the years, or if it was just like a blip on the timeline. So thank you very much. We have time for questions. Do we have questions now? No? Yes.
You talked about the Nintendo DS, and it is like, especially in that certain demographic of
Mm-hmm.
kids, and I guess yourself too. And,
Yeah.
what else kind of technology do you see? I mean, VR is kind of, when it's not for kids, there's some age segmentation. What is the next technology for that, like up-and-coming age that is considered to be good?
VR is very intimidating. You go in this thing, you're isolated from the world, you don't know where you are. It can be like shocking to go into VR. I think that we already have it. It's AI, like your phone and also augmented reality. Like that's something that is accessible. It's about things that we already know that we are not afraid of using. But I think that it's already there. The future is here already. Oh, I think that Ken Perlin is going to talk about something different. Any other questions? Right. Thank you very much.